Part 5, Vocals. Alright, welcome to the most requested episode of all time, at least in my little world, and that's how I make my vocal chops, or the vocal chops in King of Thebes specifically. So here's what we're gonna take a closer look at today. I hope you're as excited as I am for this, because this is obviously the main element of the track. This is what makes King of Thebes the track that it is. And first of all, thanks so much for your patience. Like, I know some of you guys have been requesting this ever since the track came out almost 4 years ago. So thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate that. And sorry it took that long, but hey, here we are. Anyway, I think this video can really open your eyes, not only for cutting vocals, but sampling in general. So of course I'm going to walk you through my process and show you, the details of my process, but this is more of an inspiration of how you can develop your own style of sampling, because there's different techniques and styles for vocal chops, and each of them has a certain kind of sound based on the tools that have been used. So not that I use any particularly fancy tools, it's just the way I use them I think is a little bit unusual, and this is something that I want to show today. And in this video I'm going to cover two different ways of sampling, one very simple, low effort way, and another more sophisticated one, which I personally prefer, and that's also the technique that I used for King of Thebes. Alright, let's start with the lazy way first. Okay, so the following technique is something that you hear quite often, mainly because it's a very quick and beginner-friendly way to do vocal chops, and here's how it works. So from a given vocal track, you choose one single vocal clip or syllable that you really like. This one, for example. And then you drag and drop it into your sampler. And now you can write a melody with this sample inside your piano roll. So this is convenient, pretty straightforward. Here's an example of how this might sound in the context of a track. I'm sure you heard this type of vocal cut 1,000 times already. So it can work, it doesn't sound too horrible, but there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind in order for it to stay in that okay zone. So now there's some pros and cons to this particular technique. Let's start with the advantages. So what's cool about it is that you can work with MIDI inside your piano roll. So it's a tool that's really easy to understand, which makes it very accessible for beginners. So creating a melody line is as simple as it gets, basically the same workflow as with any other synth plugin. And of course, the second advantage is you can get results very quickly that way. So in a nutshell, this technique is very easy and very fast. However, there are some significant downsides to this that I want you to consider. So first of all, working with MIDI always means you're not really seeing what you're doing. I talked about this in the last segment. Just look at this. What the fuck? How is anyone supposed to mix that down? You have very little control with MIDI, and more importantly, you don't actually see what's going on with the audio when you pitch stuff. So the devil's in the details, as you know, and MIDI is a blessing and a curse. It's a quick way, but it's a dirty method, which has its blind spots. So doing vocal chops like this can sometimes sound kind of weird, kind of robotic, and even cheap, and here's one of the reasons why that is. So whenever you change the pitch of the vocal sample, the so-called formant frequencies shift along with it. And that changes not only the pitch, but that changes the tone, the entire characteristic of the vocal sound. So you're changing the voice. Now, what is a formant? A formant frequency, or the formant frequencies, are what make your voice unique and different to my voice, or any other voice for that matter. And those special frequencies are based on the shape of your vocal tract. So it's a physical thing, right? So a child, for example, has a different voice tone than a big-ass grown man, right? Even if they sing the same note, you can tell that the sound came, whether the sound came from a small body or a larger body. So by pitching the sample, you're actually changing the tone of the voice along with the pitch. You're actually changing the size of the vocal cords, so to speak, which is rather cruel, right? So with that said, there's a big difference between singing different pitches with your normal voice versus singing one note and then pitching it down or up artificially. Check this out. Here's some audio from a woman singing two notes that are exactly one octave or 12 semitones apart from each other. So here's a B4
La.
and a B5. You can tell it's the same vocalist, it's the same voice, just one octave apart.
La.
Now listen what happens when I transpose the B4 up to a B5 and the original B5 down to a B4. So I'm pitching the low note up and the high note down. Now this doesn't sound like that lady at all. It doesn't even sound like the same species, right? Although these are the exact same notes. This is a B4 followed by a B5.
La.
It almost doesn't sound human anymore, and the reason for that is we are messing with the form and frequencies. Now this is an extreme case, of course, but this is what's happening when you're pitching vocals, so keep that in mind. And the last downside is that by using only one single sample, you're really limited to your expression. So not only are you limited in terms of pitch range, as I just demonstrated, but also the articulation of the note itself. See, when you're playing an instrument, there's different ways to articulate a note, right? So for example, on my guitar, I can play an E like this. Just plain and simple. Or I can add some vibrato. Or play it staccato. Or mute the note. Or slide into the note. Or do a pre-bend. Etc, etc. So all of those options are missing now because I only have one single sample. So you're limited to one articulation style only, which is rather unnatural in the real world. So the danger here is to end up with a monotonous, robotic kind of sound. If that's what you're going for, then that's fine, but let's take a look at how you can get more natural sounding vocal cuts. Okay, so the following approach takes way more time and effort compared to the easy way by a large margin, so you better bring some time and patience to the session. There is no shortcut for this. Well, maybe someone will figure out a faster way, but until then, let me walk you through the workflow of this particular procedure. The first step is exactly the same as with the easy technique. We begin with any a cappella. The vocal track doesn't actually matter as much as the processing, so the source material is secondary. In this case, getting that sound has a lot to do with the editing technique itself, which is a good thing because that means you can use whatever you have and it will work out. I've actually used the exact same technique in other tracks with completely different vocal tracks and it always worked out. Here's an example. Plus, it's not too complicated. All I'm using are basic functions that every DAW has, so you should be able to follow along no matter what workstation you prefer. Now, for more natural sounding vocals, I like to stay in one pitch, so the form and frequencies don't move and stay right where they belong. Again, those are the frequencies responsible for the voice color or tone. Mind you, it doesn't have to be the original pitch. You can pitch the vocals before you start cutting, so just make sure you are in key with the song and it sounds alright. The point is to only have one voice to keep it under control. So that's an easy second step. Don't mess with the pitch, because we are very sensitive to human voice, so every artificial change is even more noticeable with voice compared to other instruments, and that's why I don't want to fuck with it by pitching the vocals up or down. Now, the next thing is to prepare your chops by cutting the entire a cappella up. What I want is variety. I don't want to be limited to one sample only, for reasons that I mentioned before. So what I would do is to slice my a cappella into tiny bits that I can then pick from, and those are usually single syllables. This will take a while, but it's better to invest some time in the preparation phase to avoid unnecessary work in the long run. One important thing to keep in mind is to cut out all unpleasant sounds from the a cappella. I personally find that consonants usually sound bad with vocal chops, so I make sure to remove all the t, s, ch, k, p sounds. So let's take another listen to the track. Notice how there's not a single consonant present in the vocals. I only keep vowels because what I want is the vocal texture. What I'm looking for is that vocal tone. And consonants are just unnecessary top-end noise from a sonic perspective. And they also tend to interfere with the drums, which makes the whole thing even harder to control. So removing consonants makes the vocal cuts much smoother. An exception to this would be breaths. I like to add some breaths every once in a while so it sounds a little bit less robotic and a little more human. And once I'm done with the preparation, I can actually reverse the clips, so I end up with twice the amount of syllables to choose from. By the way, reversing vocals is a good idea if you want a more abstract vocal sound instead of ending up with random bits and pieces of lyrics. That happens sometimes if you stay with the original orientation, I guess. To get the vocals even more smooth, there's a few more tricks. I'm gonna play it again and notice how it's almost like one note is leading into the next one. The way to create this sort of legato effect with vocal cuts is to use volume envelopes and reverb. Working with volume automation is the essential part of this particular vocal chop sound. If there's a secret, that would be it. So check this out. Let's take a listen to this part of the track, first with the volume envelope active and then without it. And now without the volume automation. So this is what you start out with. This sounds choppy and out of control. What I want is this though. With these kinds of fade-ins you get way softer edges. It's the same method, by the way, I use for my sidechaining that I covered in the drums episode. And in addition to that, I also drown the vocals in reverb to get a longer tail that bleeds into the next sample. So this is one way to get some more continuity into the melody. And that's pretty much it for the processing. As you can see, there's nothing else on the effects chain except for some EQ, which is just a filter opening up. And from this point onwards, it all comes down to experimentation and combining different syllables with each other and playing with the volume envelopes. So the way to get unique vocal chops is to do hours and hours of trial and error. Here's some workflow tips to get you through that long-ass process. So first of all, it really helps to be familiar with your tools and know all the shortcuts that are sensitive to the environment that you're in. We're going to be working in the playlist exclusively, and I recommend you get to know your tools well because you need to get to a point where you can switch quickly between tools without even thinking about it and get into that creative flow state, because otherwise it will just be a stop and go sort of pain in the ass and it will take forever. So the four most important tools you're going to be using are the mouse wheel. Pressing down the mouse wheel brings out this hand tool, which allows you to navigate in your project more smoothly. Also, pressing the mouse wheel over any control sets it back to the default setting, in case you didn't know that. Then we got the slice tool. The shortcut is C. To make a straight vertical cut, hold down the shift key. I don't know why anyone would cut like this anyway. So me personally, I always hold down the shift key no matter what. Left click splits the clip and right click cuts off the short side of the clip. As you can see, it turns red. This is the right click cut. Next up is the paint tool. The shortcut is B. This is sort of your standard tool to place things and move things around and whatnot. It's also sensitive to the shift and control key. Next up is the slip tool. Shortcut is S. It allows you to kind of scrub through the entire a cappella, which can be quite handy, but be careful. It's really easy to get lost and frustrated that way because you end up doing way more unnecessary editing work. After all, you don't want to be cutting all the consonants again. That's why we did it once in the beginning. And the last very important tool is the mute tool. The shortcut would be T on the keyboard. And this one I use a lot to sort of toggle between different versions of my vocal composition. See, the gray clips are muted and the purple ones are active. And I can just, switch between versions, so to speak. And that's why I love FL Studio, by the way. You can create as many tracks as you want and move clips around vertically without messing with the effects channel assignment. So that way you can test a lot of different versions and iterations quickly. And believe me, there's going to be countless versions before it really begins to come together. Okay, so that would be the tools for you. Now, with all of those different syllables and literally limitless options, it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the possibilities. So here's some guidance on how you can create your melody. I'm sure you heard about how music is a universal language, even with instrumental music, even without lyrics. So with vocal cuts, you might not actually work with words, but you're still bound to certain musical rules, right? Because in every language there's grammar and there's rules. And one concept of music theory is called phrasing. And more specifically, it has to do with melodic structure. A little disclaimer, I am not a trained musician, if you haven't noticed, so I have to dumb it down and explain it to the best of my ability, so bear with me here. I won't get into much technical detail about phrasing, because I can't, but I'm more about the intuitive approach anyway. So if you're interested in the theory, you could go down the music theory rabbit hole on YouTube. There's great content out there. There's endless videos on this. If you want to watch it, go ahead. So phrasing, as I understand it, is just like in speech, there's questions and there's answers and there's pauses in between statements, and those statements are also connected in different ways. So when it comes to your melody, leaving space in between notes is very important. And it's also crucial to pay attention to how your musical phrases connect with each other on a macro level. Like, is it just random melodies stringed together, or is there some sort of direction to your melody line, a theme or something? Can the listener anticipate what's coming next, or is it just random notes, so to speak? You see, the danger with vocal chops as opposed to real vocals is that you can cram an unnatural amount of syllables into every single bar without any consideration for the performer, because there is no one who needs to actually sing this, right? But all I want to say here is that it's a good idea to treat your vocal chops as a living thing. And that's a mindset that really helped me, was to pretend that my vocal track had stamina as well, like a real human being. And it needed to breathe every once in a while. And that way I could make it sound a little bit more organic. Now let's take a listen to the first bar here. So this would be one phrase, right? It's like, okay, what else? What else do you have to say? Now we're waiting for more because I didn't resolve it yet. There's more to be said. And I left that space on the fourth beat on purpose for two reasons, really. First, to give the vocal track a little break, and also to create some tension and anticipation for that second phrase. Then it continues. And then it continues until the very last part, where it's actually the end of a statement. It's like a period. It's like a full stop. So before it's like na 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 na, comma, na 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 na, comma, da 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 da, full stop. Okay? Like I mentioned before, I also like to add some breaths, like literal breath samples from the a cappella, because breathing acts like punctuation in my phrasing. I know this is something that's really hard to quantify, and honestly, you need to be able to feel it out. At least this is my approach. Maybe there's a more smart way to do this. If you're having trouble with this, I recommend you listen to trumpet players or, saxophone players or something along those lines, because instruments where people are physically limited to the breath tend to have much more natural phrasing, just by design, right? So I hope this made any sense at all. This entire vocal chop phrasing thing can be a great abstract exercise. It can be quite meditative even, especially when you get into that flow state, but it will probably drive you nuts at some point. This is just a given, because it's like solving a hyper complex puzzle without the box that has the picture on it. right? You have no idea what the end result will look like, or if there is even an end result and a happy ending to the story. So one last important point is to remember to be patient with this. You're not going to get it right in one session. You're probably not going to get it right after the third session either. So set your expectations accordingly. In my case, King of Thebes took me 3 whole weeks for the vocal chops alone. 3 weeks of working every day for long hours, by the way, not just 3 weeks passed and I suddenly had the track, right? So don't expect too much too soon, okay? This technique takes a lot of time, but in my opinion, it's well worth it. I'm happy with the results. So take your time, take regular breaks, don't force it, just try to have fun with it. If you're super frustrated after 3 hours in, you can just take a break, bro. Get to it tomorrow. Like, nobody's forcing you to finish it right away. Just try to have fun. The wonderful thing about this approach is that you really learn your tools and improve your ear for sampling and editing in general, which even if the project you're working on won't turn out the way you want, you will still benefit from honing your craft. Okay, one person asked if there was any part of the song that was scratched and why it didn't make the cut, and the answer is, bro, there was way more parts that didn't make it to the final version than the actual thing that I ended up with. And I think that's just the nature of music production, really. To give you some perspective on this whole subject, I want to show you this clip of Jordan Peterson where he explains how he writes his books. And I think it's analogous to the process in music production.
There's actually a technical process that goes along with this. I use a computer in a particular way. So imagine I've laid out an essay.
Okay.
Well, then what I'll do is I usually use 2 screens. I take a paragraph out, put it on the other screen, break it into sentences.
Okay.
So I put spaces between all the sentences.
Got it.
Then I look and see if the sentences are organized properly, if that's the proper order. Try to reconstruct them so that they make more sense, they flow better. Then I take each sentence one at a time and try to write a better version of the sentence, maybe 3 or 4 times. And every time I try to write a better version of the sentence, I try to think of all the ways that sentence is wrong and could be fixed. So at the level of the word, at the level of the phrase, at the level of the sentence.
Technical.
Oh, you bet. Like for Maps of Meaning, the first book, I probably wrote every sentence in that book 50 times.
Are you kidding
Oh, no,
me?
absolutely. And then, well, there's more. So then I'll put the paragraph back together, and if it's better than the original paragraph, then I'll put it in. So then I have a replacement for it. But then also imagine it's a chapter. Well, then the chapter has a structure, so I'll outline the structure. So this is real helpful too if you're writing a chapter. It's like, well, boil it down to 10 sentences. So you've written a
chapter down to 10 sentences.
Yeah, you got a chapter, write a 10-sentence outline. And that forces you to condense what you wrote. And with 10 sentences, you can see the argument. Does that argument make sense? Then you can cut and paste the paragraphs from the essay back into that structure. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, then you have a very, very tight argument. I have a writing guide on my website at jordanbpeterson.com under products. It's free. It's just a Word document, but it outlines how to do this. Imagine if you're writing. So here's what you have to get right if you're writing. The whole argument has to make sense as a whole. Okay, you can think rather unclearly and still make an argument that works as a whole. Sometimes I read essays written by intuitive students, and the essay works as a whole. Like there's a good idea in it, but it's very badly written. But there's an idea there. So it sort of succeeds at the highest level. But then if something's written real well, it's every word is the right word. Every phrase is the right phrase. The phrases are put into sentences properly. The sentences are organized into paragraphs properly. And you have to edit at every one of those levels.
That's why I said piano. So it has to be like if one, pianist listen to another person play and one is off, they catch it, right?
Yeah,
a regular person's not going to catch it.
Yeah.
So you're going to that level of perfection.
Well, then I also read everything out loud.
Do you seek perfection in that area?
No, but what I seek, I wouldn't say I seek perfection. What I seek is that I can't do it any better. So I know a book is done when I can't write it any better.
Ability.
Yeah, that's right. I max my ability out. So if I can't, and if I'm at the point where when I'm starting to edit, I'm not sure if it's better, then it's time to quit.
Interesting.
And I also often, if I'm writing, like I'll write something and then wait, like you have to wait a couple of weeks to look at it again, because often when you're writing and you reread it, you read what you think you wrote, because you still have the ideas in your head that are part of the cloud of ideas. And it's not until you forget the context in some sense that you can actually see what you wrote. And so there has to be pauses in your writing.
I hope this will help you on your journey. If you have any specific questions, don't hesitate to ask. You can hit me up anywhere. So see you in the next episode when we talk about the synth and the bass. Take care.